G'day and welcome, everybody. And Ross and Jono with you once again. I'm back in Australia. I've just come back from Louisiana with having spent a couple of weeks there with Ross. The conference went really well, didn't it, Ross?
It did. And look, we miss you. Seth and I are all alone here in the building again, and but I see that you have that nice travel vest on, so it's good to see you again, man.
I got this at, what is it, the St. Francisville Mercantile.
Yep.
Really happy with it. Nice to have nice convenient pockets available where I can just put all the bits and pieces. Certainly good on for a little travel vest. So happy with that. And it's cold here.
Yep.
In this neck of the woods down in Australia. We are continuing with our we're working our way through the Moses Scroll, but we're doing it in such a way that we are adding all the information that Ross has happened upon, continuing to investigate the Shapira Saga over the last couple of years since you wrote the book.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Now, when we left off before I came to your neck of the woods, we were looking at the claim by, let me see if I can remember all these names, Monsieur
Charles Clermont-Ganneau. Yeah.
Clermont-Ganneau.
That's right. Yeah, Mr. Names.
Man of many titles. Mr. Names. And he wrote off the scroll in 1883, August of 1883, saying, well, the reason why it's like this, of course, is because you see that it's cut from the bottom of a Torah scroll.
Yep.
You know, the margin at the bottom is just wide enough, and you can see the little the margin lines on this side, and you can see that it's a little bit tattered on the bottom, and it's more neatly cut along the top. Obviously, it's a forgery.
Oh yeah.
That and the other, and so he did that. Now, he did that before Ginsburg had finished his analysis. Everybody's waiting for Ginsburg. Ginsburg is transcribing, he's translating, he's putting it through to the Athenaeum.
Yeah.
And he's everyone's waiting. What does this
look? He has them. Yeah, he has them eating out of the palm of his hand every week. They're waiting on him to give him just a morsel of what he sees in this manuscript. And he hasn't. By the way, I want to add, he hasn't yet really hinted one way or the other. Is it true? Is it false?
Not even hinted. And so everyone's like, "Come on, dude!" I mean, we're all to understand your lack of telling us otherwise, that this is an authentic document and we should take it all seriously. And so it's great for the papers. Even the Prime Minister comes and has a look. The Prime Minister who has given Ginsburg a grant for other purposes, and everybody's waiting. Come on, just tell us, are we to take this seriously or not? Well, before all of that is decided upon, Clermont-Ganneau arrives from France and he says, I only got to see it for a couple of days and it wasn't very well lit.
Right.
Nothing, but anyone can tell, Ross, anyone can tell that this is just cut off the bottom of the Torah scroll. And this is what he publishes. He wants to get in first.
Yep.
And this is where we find ourselves. So we're now looking at chapter 10. And as we've been suggesting for a while, the winds begin to change. There's a lot of confidence prior to this point. Shapira, Ginsburg, they're kind of working together, but Ginsburg has sort of locked himself away. And all indications are that this document is being taken very seriously. We've already spoken about Claude Conder. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we love about Condor is that he gives credit where credit is due, and as far as the Salome inscription is concerned, and Shapira's correct interpretation of that, he goes out of his way to highlight the fact that it was Shapira that correctly interpreted that inscription before anybody else, before Stacey and all of that. For various reasons, we like him. He is a war hero.
Oh yeah,
and he is the man in many respects. However, Ross, he sees that the winds are changing. He sees that the storm cloud has arrived, and as courageous as he is as a war hero, Ross, it seems like he has a reputation to protect back home. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I want to touch on something leading up to this. You really nailed this down. I want people to feel how quickly these winds of change are blowing. Again, the 14th, the prime minister is there. Ginsburg is talking with Shapira and the prime minister. They're all talking, and no one mentions that this is a fake or even hints at it. The 15th, the next day, when Clermont-Ganneau comes in, he will, in this week, we're going to cover this, he actually says, I already had my mind made up before I left. He already knew it was fake without even sight unseen. He says that. He admits it.
He did say that. He even said that. Now let me just ask you a question before we continue. What was the date, because we're talking about the 15th of August, 1883, what was the date where Bond decided that he was going to go on a little holiday? He's leaving now, but Ginsburg, before I go, I'm sure you'll come to the same conclusion as I, that this is not to be taken seriously. Goodbye. And off he goes. What? Do you remember what date it was that he left?
It is the 15th. It's the same time frame. Remember, we're rolling into let me double check. But he is preparing. Do you have it yet? Do you have it? Let's see, 165.
Because it just popped into my head. Because that's.
Well, I tell you this. It's in the book on page 66 and 67, and so it's right around the same time. It's certainly as he's preparing to go out of town. Here comes Clermont-Ganneau. So when Clermont-Ganneau comes in, remember that the boys, meaning Shapira and Ginsburg, tell him, we might let you see it later, but not right now. So then he's relegated to looking at this one fragment. Now, one thing I want to touch before we get into Ginsburg releasing his findings is, and even before we get into the great soldier scholar Condor's remarks, is that Clermont-Ganneau is staging things. Again, he already knows that he's going to call it a fake. So when he rolls into town, he's loaded for bear, as we say. Bond is getting ready. If he's not already on his way out, he's preparing to leave and go into his little vacation in the country. And if you didn't find that, I'll look for it in just a minute. But now, here's the thing. Now, again, we're only on the 18th. On Saturday, the 18th, is when Clermont-Ganneau turns basically his paperwork in. He writes his statement and his whole. Now, it hasn't hit the press yet, but remember when he went into the room where Ginsburg and Shapira are looking at the manuscript and they let him see it, this is where he comes up with his theory. Now, later there's going to be an argument, Jono, and the argument is this. Did Ginsburg say to Clermont-Ganneau, it looks like somebody cut the bottom of this scroll off, or is it Clermont-Ganneau's idea? Because both of these theories seem to match pretty well, and we'll get into that in more detail. So, I know you're still looking for this date. We'll have to come back to it, or otherwise we'll just be looking for it the whole show. Okay.
And it is the same day. So the Times, and this is on page 68, the Times published the second of Ginsburg's two articles about the scroll. Bond left to spend the weekend in the country, and Clermont-Ganneau spent the entire day in front of the display case. The Frenchman finalized his report on Saturday. He concluded, just as he suspected before ever laying eyes on the fragment, that they were the work of a modern forger. So you're right. So
it's almost like, now here's what I suspect. As Bond is going out to the country, he says something which is quite striking. He basically says, look, I think that you'll come to this. Did you just read that? I was looking at something else. Here, listen to this. Now remember, Bond is Ginsburg's boss in a way. He's paying him, and here's what he says. He lists several reasons why he thinks it's a forgery, but he says, I have little doubt that your critical examination of the manuscript in respect to the text will lead to the same conclusion as that of their external condition. So again, to your point, he's telling his subordinate, I trust that you'll come up with the right call. Now, here's the other thing that I wanted to draw attention to. It's do you think, and this is a question, do you think that Bond and Clermont-Ganneau had a chat?
I'm so glad that you asked that question, because I thought that. I cannot help but think that. I can't help but think that there is some sort of correspondence whereby they need to shoot this down, perhaps for the same reasons, for the reason that the blessings or the blessed bees were removed from the document when it was found
Conspiracy.
in the time of Josiah Jeremiah. It's a conspiracy.
Mm-hmm.
There is various institutions, very rich and powerful institutions, that must be protected. And if this were to be seen as an authentic document, people would reconsider eventually. Hang on, wait a minute. Why do we need all of this when it's entirely within our hands? They can't have that. Now, I'm not saying this is what happened, but it just wouldn't surprise me. Now, if I mean, consider, Ross, that, I mean, of course, the Prime Minister came and saw this. Do you think that the powers that be within the churches and institutions didn't come and have a look as well?
Oh, yeah.
And perhaps didn't make theological connections to what might be the fallout should they declare this to be an authentic document? It doesn't surprise me. And one has to wonder and ask themselves the question that you just asked, and it certainly occurred to me as well. I wonder if someone quickly went over to France and said, listen, you're external to this. You're an expert. We need you you're one of the names, and we need you to come in and shoot this down for these reasons. Here's a tidy sum. Bond. Oh, look, Clermont-Ganneau's right. I've got to go, but I'm sure you'll come to the same conclusion as me. Oh, look, he's already come to the same conclusion as me. Better toe the line.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden, we're about to find out what Condor thinks as well. Go ahead. What are
yeah.
your thoughts? I fully speculate with you. Yeah.
Well, so it's a thought that crossed my mind when I was in the midst of all this research. It seemed to, as you said, tidy. There's so many different things going on, and yet the tide turns so sharply. Again, we're just 2 days later from the Prime Minister's visit and so forth. Okay, so now Condor, let me back up. Bond will later in life write an autobiography. And in that autobiography, he tells the story that when Shapira showed up in London, one of the people that Shapira trusted to have in the room to see this document, which he believed was an ancient, authentic manuscript of a Torah text, was Claude Condor. And he trusted Condor. They were friends. Condor would come to his shop, and Condor respected his scholarship. So Condor knows that Shapira is a capable biblical scholar, and Shapira knows that Condor knows that, and Shapira knows that Condor has come to his defense
so Condor was
and so
in
forth.
his corner.
That's right.
When it came to the debate over the Siloam inscription, Condor was in his corner, most certainly.
Now, there is a very strange story related in the autobiography of Besant, and one of the things that he said is, which Besant records later, is that after the meeting in July, when all the big scholars of London were in the room at the PEF headquarters, one of the things that he remembers is that Condor called him aside and he goes, this is a very interesting text. All of the mistakes, and I'm paraphrasing, but all of the problems in the text of our Deuteronomy don't exist in this manuscript. So here we have, less than a month later, I want to read something that now, less than a month later, Jono, this is what Condor says.
While we're waiting for Ross to come back,
hold on.
That particular information, sorry, you just bounced off, but I was just saying,
I don't hear him.
While
hold on, Jono.
That the information
Can
that he was expressing to Besant was in fact the travel itinerary. That was case in point. Look at how the travel itinerary. Oh, okay, we're good. But that was specifically what he
I don't hear him at all.
Besant aside to highlight in defense of the scroll. Do we have your backups?
Say something, Jono.
Technical difficulties.
No,
we don't have audio from you. We have Let's see. Well, I'm going to check with the viewers online.
And
good day to everyone. He's gone again.
Okay, I can hear you now, Jono. I'm sorry. I'm sure you said some brilliant things, but just as a quick sidebar, if you catch me up in a brief, I know everyone else heard it, but just let me know where we're at. Tell me what you just said.
So you highlighted that it was Condor that took Bassan's aside and highlighted that some of the problems that we have within canonical texts do not appear.
That's right.
In the Moses Scroll, and the case in point. Or the example that he chose to highlight was the travel itinerary.
Yeah.
Saying, look how seamless it is in the Moses Scroll.
Gotcha.
It's a beautiful thing.
Gotcha.
And you were going to continue from there. Go ahead.
That's right. Thanks for catching me up. So here's something that's very interesting, and it says that this is from the chapter, from the sources when I was researching. He begins to say, this is Conder in his report, that he had just arrived in London and he had the opportunity to examine the manuscript strips. He said he hadn't seen them before, and he had an opportunity to examine and compare them with other manuscripts, true and forged. Now, here's the point I want to bring out. Based on his assessment, he said, Conder, less than a month after he said all those great things you just said, he goes, I had no hesitation in concluding that the supposed fragments of Deuteronomy were deliberate forgeries. What we're going to see, Jono,
no hesitation, Ross.
No hesitation. I mean, he says he looks at them, he goes, yep, those are forgeries. But that's not true. And I'm sorry, because I love Claude Condor and all of his brilliant work, but I cannot agree with this report. And it gets worse. It gets worse. He goes on to, if I can cover one more piece that I think we can talk about for a moment, he begins to tell that he frequents the land across the Jordan, Transjordan, east of Jordan, in this Bedouin territory. He knows this area well. He says that in his frequent trips over, he has not heard anything, Jono, about this manuscript that the Shapira supposedly has come to acquire. Nothing about it. He said what he did hear, and this is telling, is about some Moabite forgeries that were pawned off on people. And he said, now this is the part I think is interesting, some fragments of similar pottery have been shown to me by Mr. Shapira, and I understand that the Arabs represented these as having been found with the manuscript. But wait a minute.
So which is it?
He just said he didn't hear anything about a manuscript, and now all of a sudden he says, well, I heard the story, and there's some Moabite fragments, and they were found with the... Come on. And no one is seeing through this. So there is a concerted effort, it seems, to connect in this report Shapira and forgeries, the Moabitica, and this manuscript, and I find it quite shocking. It's really bad.
On that point, Ross, if we do, and I think we fairly speculate, I don't think it's unfair to speculate that there is a conspiracy at hand. If that is the case, it would seem that it is done with haste. It's done on the fly. Ganneau just arrives, and within days, he's on a bond. Leaves and just goes, well, I'm not going to have anything to do with this, but Ginsburg, I think you're going to come to the same conclusion, and I think this, and and now Condor. But the interesting thing about it is that the reasons for denying this as an authentic document are different or have different emphasis from one person to the next.
Yeah.
And you can see that they're all trying to find, they're grasping at straws to find their own little signature upon which they can say the reason why I don't think this is a real thing. It's A, B, C, D, or whatever. But none of them seem to agree with each other that this is the reason for it. In Condor's case, I mean, he says this, but then the next thing he goes on to say, I've been to all of these caves. I've been to these caves all over the place, the area that he's talking about, and they're absolutely moldy and mildew and damp, and there's no way that leather can possibly survive, Ross, in such caves That's just silly.
Look, listen to that point. Here's his exact quote. The manuscript under consideration is therefore, if it be genuine, Jono, and we think it is, would be more than 2,000 years old. I do not think any archaeologist will suppose that leather as limp and supple as on which this manuscript is written could exist for a length of time in the damp atmosphere of a country which has rainfall of 20 inches. Then he talks about how he went into all these. There's not a cave in the Transjordan that I haven't been in. Yeah, he's been in all.
Let me ask you something about that, Ross. Did he ever venture to Qumran?
He did, and we bring that up in the book. And I tell you, he says he's been in all these caves, and yet there he stood at the cemetery at Qumran, and a stone's throw away in a cave, cave 4. I could throw a rock with my left hand into the opening on cave 4, and I'm right-handed, by the way. From the cemetery, and that cave had the largest cache of ancient manuscripts. He didn't go in that one. But look, there's another thing about Condor. And again, I love Claude Condor. I just don't like his behavior here. This book is called Near Eastern Tribal Societies During the 19th Century, Economy, Society, and Politics Between Tent and Town by Eveline Vandersteen, put out by Routledge. Now, I found this book and read it in my attempts to research when I was writing the Moses Scroll, and here's something it addresses. One of the other arguments of Clermont-Ganneau, of Condor is, I wish he would have mentioned the tribal groups, because we just don't know a lot about that part of his story, because if I just knew that, I could figure out if this is true or not. But we do know that, Jono. Not only does he say this, but also Herman Goethe makes a similar comment. He says, he tells a story about this Sheikh Erakat. We don't know anything about Sheikh Erakat. Well, let me tell you what. Anyone who Googles or reads this book will find out the truth, the veracity of Shapira's reports. For instance, Sheikh Erakat is the guy. All these 19th century travelers report, a lot of them do, that when they wanted to make safe travel from, say, Jerusalem to Jericho and beyond the Jordan to Transjordan, they would hire a certain guide by the name of Sheikh Erakat or one of his sons. We also know the names of the tribes that Shapira is dealing with in the Transjordan. So again, we have a point that is made that is not substantiated by the facts. And so it just keeps it just keeps coming across to me as something which seems stacked. The deck is stacked against Shapira, intentionally or not, and it's really a bad story as we see it unfold.
More improbable set of assumptions could hardly be conceived, yet the difficulty of the great age which it is necessary to suppose leather to be able to attain without rotting in a damp cave, it is even more fatal to this clever forgery. So this is the way that he signs off.
Yeah.
And this is on the 18th of August. And this is, how quickly is this published, Ross?
It comes out on the 21st. So it's like, now remember, it's on the weekend. So it's got to go. I mean, you have Bond going out to the country because he wants to get away while the sacrificial sheep is led to the altar. And
a little bit of Pontius Pilate washing his hands. Right?
That's right. Yeah. Bond. Oh, it's really, really bad. But look, everyone starts getting on this bandwagon because you don't want to be the person, because the big scholars and the people with influence are saying, look, you better, and we saw this in Germany too, you better say it's fake or bad things will happen, or certainly good things won't happen to you. You need to side. Come to the dark side, Luke. Come to the dark side. And that's what happens. Look, and the newspapers pick up on it. Go ahead.
The newspapers pick up on it. Okay, so here we are. And it is published. So Condor, he said, well, it seems like someone's had a whisper in his ear. Ganneau, who's a massive name in these areas, you wouldn't want to disagree with him. Comes out and says, oh, this is not only is it a forgery, but it's obviously a forgery. And why is Ginsburg leading you all on in the papers?
Yep.
I can tell you straight away, and you don't need to take this seriously. And then so Condor's like, okay, I need to clear my name because I'm associated with this. My name comes up a lot. I was here, I was there. Let me just write this off as well for other reasons. And then this puts an enormous amount of pressure on Ginsburg. Ross, what happens with Ginsburg? What does he do?
Well, let me add one piece. Here's something that happens so quickly. Remember, the 18th. This is a Saturday. You've got things going on. Clermont-Ganneau's doing his report. Conder is pencil whipping his report to say that it's fake. Newspaper reporters seem to have a heads up. By Wednesday, the 22nd, the museum has already pulled down from display the leather strips. Everybody is talking, and they must be saying, this thing is falling down. In fact, here's what one reporter said. On Wednesday the 22nd, the Standard, one of the newspapers, published a lengthy piece which began, "The solemn farce, Jono, of the Shapira manuscript seems rapidly drawing to a close." And then it goes on to say, "We just don't understand what took them so long to see through this fake." So now everybody, even people who aren't qualified to make the decision, they're jumping on the bandwagon too. Oh, I know it was fake. I knew it was fake all along.
So I have a question about that. It is withdrawn from view. Who would make that decision, by the way, Ross?
Bond, without hesitation. Bond.
And he would have had to have done that, one would imagine, before he left.
Well,
I suppose he could have wired.
He comes back from the country, and now here's what we have to understand. Yeah, he's got to be. He's got to be, at least I'm thinking it's a weekend trip. I don't know. But here's what we do know. What we do know is that he must know prior to Ginsburg's report coming out. I'm sure that Ginsburg pays him a visit and says, okay, you told me before your country trip that I should make the right call. Here's what I'm going to report. And he hands him the report. We know that he had to report to his boss before he went to the papers with it. Now, he goes to the papers, but the paper, remember, now his report won't come out until the 27th of August. I know I'm throwing a lot of dates at people, and they're saying, well, not everyone has August of 1883 burned into their memory, so just try to stay with me. It's all happening within a 10-day period. Bam, 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 bam. So Ginsburg, though, puts together his report. Now, what is striking about this report, and you and I have discussed this quite a bit, it looks a lot like what Clermont-Ganneau came out with. The main bit of this, and we can talk about it, is it's obvious to the big dogs, to Clermont-Ganneau and to Ginsburg, that this manuscript has been cut from the bottom of an existing scroll. This is their view. Now, I held this up in a previous discussion we had, but here's an example from, it's on the cover of Emmanuel Tove's book, but you'll notice this document here is an actual Dead Sea Scroll, one that is known to be of ancient, authentic scroll of Psalms. And notice this edge here at the top, that's not formatted. That's really what it looks like. And notice the bottom, it's got this jagged edge. Here's what these guys said. Here's what Clermont-Ganneau and Ginsburg said. It is obvious that this side is cut from the bottom of a scroll. Look how clean it is. And you know what they all said? Oh, yeah, I see it now. You're right. That's clear. Well, how many Dead Sea Scrolls do we have now that are authentic ancient documents that look just like it? But see, they didn't know. In their defense, they'd not seen anything like it. But that is the main, and they both have that same piece of evidence.
Can I ask you something?
Yeah.
If we further entertain, the conspiracy theory, do you think that Ginsburg was let in on the assault that was about to take place upon Shapira's scroll? Or do you think he was left high and dry and then now with egg on his face because he's been, as you say, he's got the whole of the public eating out of his hand, and he's just giving them little bits at a time and presenting this, as far as they know, as an authentic document?
I go with the latter. I think Ginsburg, this is my feel, I believe he believed it was authentic. Now, later he's even going to tell his daughter in a letter, her name is Ethel, he's going to say, look, I knew it was fake all along, but that's what he has to say. But
so in that case, Ross, in that case, well, I'm just saying in that case, and I agree with you. I think that bears out. But what that means, though, is that if there is a conspiracy, Bond's in on it, Ganneau's in on it, probably Condor's in on it, and when Bond goes to the country, he's kind of tipping Ginsburg off as best he can. He's kind of tipping him off, going, "You're about to be left high and dry. You're about to be left with egg on your face. You know what? This is going to get in the country, but I think you'll come to this conclusion."
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
You're going to come to that conclusion, right, Ginsburg? You're going to do okay. Going now.
Yep.
I think that's perhaps Bond's attempt to tip him off so that he doesn't appear like a fool, because this is what Ganneau does to him. Ganneau comes in and goes, "Anyone can tell. Why is Ginsburg taking so long? Doesn't take so long. I'll tell you how he did it."
Yep.
And that doesn't reflect well on Ginsburg. Go ahead.
Yeah, Clermont-Ganneau is such a cocky person. He even makes statements like, "Hey, give me one of those old scrolls, and I'll make you a scroll of the Book of Numbers or Genesis or whatever." Now, some in the media, Jono, feel that something's wrong. Now, by the way, I want everybody to know that at this point in the chronology, Ginsburg has told Bond, his boss at the British Museum, but he hasn't published it. It'd be several days. In fact, about this time, his second installment comes out of the text of the Shapira manuscript. So people are still, when they read Clermont-Ganneau's negative assessment, they read Condor's negative assessment, they also see Ginsburg says, "And for my next installment of the Shapira manuscript," but he's still not saying it's fake. And they're getting Clermont-Ganneau's report. They got Condor. They all trust Condor. I mean, he's an Englishman. He's a soldier scholar. They love him. And so they're getting a mixed signal now. Well, people start picking up on this. They sense the tide is turning. Some of these media, we call them fake news, they jump on board right away because they don't want to get hit with the fallout. So some of the newspapers begin to say, "Well, look, hey, we kind of suspected this all along. We've been giving you the story as we get it." But some reporters suspect something, and we're going to talk about a little bit of that. But I want to go through some of these critiques or criticisms.
I would like to
Ginsburg.
do that, yeah. So Ginsburg's criticism, so he does, in order to save face, he does go into a little bit more detail of Ganneau's theory, and he has to agree. He goes, "Oh, yes, well, I knew this all along." And obviously this is why, some of the newspaper guys are going, "Well, if you knew this all along, dude, then why have you been... Why?
Right.
Why?
Right.
But in any case, he does this. But there's some other. He needs to find his own, like I say, his own little signature on the claim of forgery. What are they?
So the first thing he does is, as usual, he does come out the gate and say the manuscript is a forgery. I mean, he says that straight from the gate, and then he gives his reasons, and he says, "Listen, if it were legitimate, it would have to be before 300 BC. Now, the reason he says 300 BC is he wants to establish with his readers the known fact among biblical scholars that the text that we have of Deuteronomy is confirmed in a sense to have been established by that date. And how do we know that? Because you have the Septuagint, you have things that were known at that time. So now there could be slight differences between the text, orthographic, there can be spelling, there can be slightly different translations, but generally the text is known. Now, what he wants to indicate, though, is that this manuscript, the Shapira fragments, read way different, and so if it's real, he says, it would have to be that old. And then he says, but here's why I'm telling you it's a fake. And he bases his forgery claim on external and internal characteristics. So he comes at it with both barrels. Quickly, he covers the cut from the bottom of a scroll theory. Now, why does he say that? Because that's already been put out, you see. And so he wants to say, and this argument, by the way, goes on for a long time, even between the descendants of Ginsburg were fighting the theory that their daddy, their grandpa, didn't figure it out, but Clermont-Ganneau did. Fight goes on, and it's documented. But he wants to say, listen, we've got several manuscripts that Shapira supplied to the British Museum, which have the bottoms cut off of them in places. So he wants to say...
Yemenite scrolls, right?
Yeah, and he wants to even say, here are some numbers you can go check. And I believe that you and I have discussed this. I think that those have gone back and been checked by Dershowitz and others. And so the theory doesn't hold up. But the bottom line is, he says one of these scrolls came to the British Museum in 1877, which is the year that Shapira came to possess his scroll. But he didn't come to possess it until 1878. And so, so again, it's almost like these scholars seeking to discredit Shapira and the scroll. They push and they don't worry about the facts because people, Jono, are lazy. Scholarship is lazy. People don't investigate. But so get past that. The next thing, here's an example. He says, the upper and lower margins are very rough and ragged and worn in the old scrolls, as will be seen here, here, and here. And he says this is clearly what Shapira did. He cut it off. Well, no, that's what Dead Sea Scrolls look like. Thank you very much. Here's a big one. They're spelling, we call them orthographic problems. Words are spelled differently than you would expect them to be spelled in Biblical Hebrew. Now, Shapira would know this. So, or any forger who has an example in front of him of the Hebrew wouldn't make spelling mistakes on commonly used Hebrew words as this manuscript, the Shapira strips, do. Here's an example. He says, this is Ginsburg, the following analysis says that no less than 4 or 5 different persons engaged in the production of the forgery. The compiler of the text was, get this, Polish, Russian, or German Jew, or maybe learned Hebrew in the north of Europe. Well, who does that describe? It describes Shapira.
Sounds a little bit like Shapira, right?
But you know who else it sounds like? Guess who else is a Polish Jew from that region? Ginsburg. But see, he's a good Jew. He's already been accepted into the establishment, the elite. He's even pictured later with a little button nose, whereas Shapira is drawn in typical, stereotypical features, tropes against the Jewish people.
Anti-Semitic.
Yeah, exactly. So then he gets into how the internal characteristics, things that were dead giveaways to him. He talks about how the Decalogue is based on Leviticus 19. By the way, Jonah, I want the listeners, the viewers, to know that this coming Saturday, I'm teaching a live class, and I'm going to get into some of this on Leviticus 19. So, but quickly, moving through a couple of more points, he then gets into something that you and I have talked until we're blue in the face, and that is this, that the blessings are missing from the canonical text and are included in Shapira's manuscript. So he says the forger, he doesn't name, he just hints that it's somebody that looks just like Shapira and sounds like him and writes like him. He says that this person knew the Bible well enough to know that the blessed bees, as we call them, are missing, so he inserts them in his manuscript, and then he bases the 10 Commandments, which are different in this manuscript, he bases it on Leviticus 19. If you read Ginsburg's, one more point, if you read Ginsburg's report closely, he says a couple of things that I think modern students of the Bible should take pause over, and that is, He said, look, the fact that the Bible already has two different versions of the Ten Commandments, Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5, the forger said, hey, what's one more? And then he gets into it. Well, that's something that ought to make us go, wait a minute, are there really? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, no, I was just going to say, why does Ginsburg think that this is evidence of a forgery, though? That it should include, as we've mentioned before, I think it's Sota 7.5 mentions that the sages of Israel say, well, of course, it would have had the corresponding blessings as well, just as we see that the blessed bees would have been corresponding to the cursed bees. That would have been read out as well. We just don't have it recorded there. This is the claim in Sota 7.5. Why then would that be a case in point of evidence of forgery?
It's not. Your point is well taken. It's not a proof that the document is a forgery. What he does, it's the old shell game, like a magician will do. He'll say, because there is a known problem in the canonical text, see, and this manuscript answers that problem. It's a fake. And you're like, well, either that or maybe it could be real. Did you ever think about that? And he goes, well, the misspelled words, it's like someone who pronounces a word a certain way that sounds like someone from Northern Europe who learns Hebrew. You're like, what in the world are you talking about, Ginsburg? In fact, we're going to come to this in August 28th. We're not there yet, but in probably in the next couple of weeks, we're going to talk about this. Shapira addresses the silliness of Ginsburg's point by point by point in a fabulous rebuttal to this. But the bottom line is he really goes to extreme to come up with excuses as to why it might be a fake that don't prove, in my mind, that this document is a forgery. They just don't.
So reading over this and just refreshing my memory on this particular chapter, something jumped out at me in his list of reasons why he believes it's a forgery that I hadn't noticed before. And the reason why it jumped out at me is because you and I have been looking at something peripheral to this just a couple of weeks ago, and we recorded a program on it, and people can go back and see that, our discussion on the connection between Jeremiah and the Moses Scroll. And what it is that Ginsburg claims, a reason why it's a forgery, Ross, is because you see, lepanim is swapped out for me'olam, and obviously then that means it's a forgery. And the reason why he chose that word, Ross, is because that word appears in the Moabite stone. So obviously the forger wants it to look like the Moabite stone, wants it to be as old as, uses the language and the letters thereof. And I thought, well, that's a bit curious.
Yeah.
Because we had just discovered that in Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 29, it swaps out le'olam, or it uses rather le'olam instead of achrihem, I think it is. And whereas in Jeremiah alludes to this particular verse and quotes it specifically from the Moses Scroll, the way that it's written in the Moses Scroll. So I made a couple of notes, and I want you to help me to think this through.
Okay.
The phrase is from antiquity. Ginsburg claims that the forger exchanged the word using Deuteronomy chapter 2, verse 10, 12, and 20. And this is where it's saying, let's see, the sons of Esau live in the mountains of Seir, and they used to call them Horim.
Right.
They dwelt in it from antiquity. And then in Moab, and they used to call them such and such, and they dwelt in it from antiquity, Ross. And then, this is where it's used. So it's used 3 times. And Ginsburg claims that the forger exchanged the word lepanim. Lepanim, what does this mean? To before? Would that be a fair?
That's close enough. Okay. Yeah, in front of you kind of thing.
In front of you. Yeah. So it's like look to the past, if you like. For the word me'olam, from all time. Is that fair?
Yeah.
That he's now. Why this word has changed is another. I mean, why would the the editor of Deuteronomy swapped this out. There's another discussion. I'm going to look at that. But Ginsburg claims that this was done because he speculates the forger was copying from the Moabite stone. What Ginsburg fails to mention, Ross, is that while olam is used in line 7 of the Moabite stone, I had a look at this. I spent some time looking at the Moabite stone last night.
Yeah.
Me'olam on line 10, mapani, right, from before me, is used in line 19. So the word is used, that word is used in the Moabite stone, line 19 of the Moabite stone. So it's not a matter of choosing words that's used in the Moabite stone.
Right.
These words are all available to choose from. Furthermore, Deuteronomy 5:29, as I just said, uses the word le'olam, to all time, whereas the Moses Scroll renders achrihem, after them. And achri being used on line 3 of the Moabite stone. That's there as well.
So both options were before on the Moabite stone. So you're saying if his reasoning to call it a forgery is that he chose a word that was before him on the Moabite stone because he wants the document to reflect this known ancient Moabite stone, so he's going to use vocabulary from the Moabite stone. But you're saying both words are on the Moabite stone, so that's not a proof.
Both of them are. So my question for Ginsburg would be, why would the forger, after swapping in me'olam to replace lepanim, then swap out le'olam for achrihem? Why would he do that? I mean, all this vocabulary is there. And again, to your point, people are lazy and they're not going to go and check. He mentions something like this, and he doesn't expect people to go and analyze the Moabite stone, analyze the Moses Scroll, look at the canonical text and say, well, that's not really a reason, though, is it?
Yeah. Well, one other thing in this same context, Ginsburg is making the point, and others, by the way, have copied what these 19th century forger declarers have said, and they've used their critiques now. But here's an example. He said, listen, the forger, wink, wink, probably Shapira, or another Polish Jew who wants to swindle us out of some money, used language and, place names of Moabite territory. And he named specifically, he said, these names are found in the Moabite stone, and therefore the writer's just using these. But he leaves out, this is Ginsburg, he leaves out Paran, Tophel, Laban, Hatzerot, and Di-Zahav. Well, anyone who reads Deuteronomy 1:1 recognizes, academics now know that Deuteronomy 1:1 is a late addition, an insertion into the text, clearly not from a contemporary writer. How do I know that? It's third person. And it says in Deuteronomy 1:1 through Deuteronomy 1:5, it says, these are the words that Moses spoke on the other side of the Jordan, meaning that whoever wrote those words was on the west side of the Jordan, reflecting back to an ancient time. So what Ginsburg does by accident is he says what in an honest moment Claude Condor said a month before, there are things in this manuscript which reflect authenticity, and here's one of them, Jono. If you really were reading the manuscript that Moses wrote and not a later edited version, you would not read anything about what Moses did on the other side, because you would be reading what Moses wrote on the other side. And that's what Ginsburg points out is an error on his part. He makes it obvious to me that he missed a very, very vital clue. So he wraps up his letter. He checks it off by letting Bond, his boss, the guy signing his paycheck right before he goes to the country on the weekends, he's letting everybody read it. He knows what's going on. I don't think that Condor necessarily knew what these boys were up to. I think Condor was brilliant. I think Condor smelled in the air that things were turning against Shapira, and he didn't want to not come out with his own response. So I think he gambles. I think he does know text pretty well. And he says, this is a fake. It's nothing could survive in these desert. And I'm sure he had been in a lot of caves, just not all of them, as he said. So again, the winds are blowing, but here's something from a newspaper report I want to read, and then you fire off the questions. On the 23rd of August, Thursday, a writer from The Echo expressed the views of many who felt that the question of the scroll's authenticity had not been given a fair trial. So here's a writer who's been following this case closely, Jonah. This, by the way, newspapers around the world are reading reports about this manuscript. People are literally sitting, waiting on the newsboy to bring the report. They're excited. Here's what he says. Whatever the final verdict, Jono, by no means pronounced as yet, upon the Shapira manuscript might be, one point is left in no uncertainty at all. From the moment that the discoveries, so-called, were declared to the world, there was an eagerness in many quarters quite inconsistent with the true spirit of criticism or scholarship to stigmatize them as forgeries. There is an eagerness, Jono. This writer says, I'm just telling you that it sure feels like there is an eagerness, and this is contrary to scholarship or scientific evidence, for people to say these are fake. Now, the question to our viewers is this, Jono. Why is that? Why is there an eagerness in the 19th century to condemn these as forgeries when one of the main reasons, everybody says it, there's no damn way that a piece of leather can survive in a cave near the Dead Sea for 2,000 years, Jonah. It just can't happen. And this silly story about a Bedouin going into a cave to find it, well, guess what? That story sure sounds a whole lot more believable post-1946-47 when Bedouin of the Tiamara tribe go into a cave and find ancient scrolls written on leather in Paleo-Hebrew with the smell of asphalt and linen stuck to the back of a black sticky substance. Come on, man. Everybody who said that this was fake in 1883, I want to think that if you gave them a chance today and you said, what do you think now? I think they would say, whoa.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. So clearly after this, Shapira feels kicked in the guts by Ginsburg. He feels stabbed in the back by Ginsburg. He didn't expect that after all this time that he would come out and present something so incriminating, really, of Shapira. And he writes to Ginsburg, doesn't he? And he says to him, "Dear Mr. Ginsburg, you have made a fool of me by publishing and exhibiting things that you believe them to be false. I do not think that I will be able to survive this shame, although I am not yet convinced that the manuscript is a forgery, unless Mr. Ganneau, Monsieur Ganneau, did it. I will leave London in 2 days for Berlin. Yours truly, M.W. Shapira."
I think he's floored.
Why?
I think he's floored, Jono. I think he's floored. There is a scene in a movie, Braveheart, on the battlefield where Mel Gibson pulls the headgear off of someone who's pursuing his life, and he sees that it's his own friend, and he's shocked. You have to see that clip to get my excitement, because it's almost as if Ginsburg is like, "Et tu, Brute? You too?" Ginsburg. I mean, Shapira is just floored by this, and I think it's really, really betrayed. So now, by the way, we have discerned on this note card, people think that he's so utterly depressed that he's going to end his life, and because he just says, "I don't think I can survive this shame." But even on that note, he writes a grammatical point. He says, perhaps this reading actually says this, and it's quite interesting. So he's not giving up. In fact,
he's still pleading the case.
Oh yeah, he's in for the long haul. But he's just floored that someone he felt was his friend would do this to him. So he does leave. But before he does, the newspapers begin the pile on. And here's the way I ended the chapter. "He's so disappointed," says one writer to the newspapers, with the results of his bargain that he threatens to commit suicide. This we venture to think he will not do. He survived the Moabite fraud, and he'll probably survive this one too. His wise course will be to return to Jerusalem to follow up the fraud and to endeavor to trace it to its origin. And he goes on and on and on. So here's what I say. Now, all those who were sitting on the sidelines, they all jump in the pile on and they say, yep, it's a forgery. All the newspapers, reporters are flying to the press to say, we knew it all along. We suspected it. And Shapira's saying,
in a very cruel way.
Yeah.
In a very cruel way. I mean, that is cruel. And what that seems to indicate, on top of the betrayal that Shapira has received from Ginsburg, it would appear that Ginsburg has shared with the press that note.
Yeah,
that private note.
That's
that
dirty.
Sent to
yeah,
Ginsburg,
that's really, really
and
bad.
They have cruelly rubbed salt into the wound and went, oh, no, he's threatening to take his own life. It's that's just cruel.
It's really bad.
That's where we're at. That's where we're up to, and we're going to be continuing this series, Ross.
Yep.
In what is this? So we're now in chapter 11. What's going on here? What happens? Give us
a quick overview.
Preview of where we're going.
A quick overview is Shapira kind of falls off the radar. Remember, he's been sending notes. We have this report from his daughter's book, Maria. She tells us, Miriam Harry, he's been sending notes home saying, honey, listen, ladies, the thing is about to sell. He's very excited. He feels, because Ginsburg led him to believe, and I think in truthfulness, that he was going to side on authenticity. But now he disappears. He falls off the map, and the girls begin to worry. And so what we're going to do is we're going to pick up next week with what happens. Where does Shapira go? He ends up, by the way, he ends up going to the Netherlands. But why the Netherlands? We're going to get into all those kind of things. What's he doing there, and what's going on after he leaves? So it's
He's
really
still conducting business. He is there for a reason. You identify this reason, and there is a little bit of speculation as to what his plans might be. We're going to unfold that.
That's right.
The coming program. So that is it. We're now going to go to the Yachad, right, Ross? Is there any announcements? Are we telling people anything that's going on?
Well, I tell you, what we want to do is we want to, our group of supporters, we're going to go with them. We're going to meet with them for a nice little debriefing, a discussion where we can interact with those who watch the show. And by the way, thanks to all the members of the Yachad who can become members of the Yachad by joining our channel, Ross K. Nichols TV. Or also by joining the Patreon or joining our Discord server where you pay and you support us and you help make all of this possible. Thank you very much to members in all three of those for the Yachad. So now we're going to go and we're going to talk about this, and we're going to let these people who've been watching fire back and tell us what they think. What are their thoughts? So, but we'll be on Zoom. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that is our hour. We'll be back again this time next week. And until then, have a good week.
Yep, and we're going to start that up in just a few minutes, and you'll be able to get the Zoom link, be able to get the Zoom link on a YouTube member post, on our Patreon, and also on Discord. You'll be able to get the link. So give us a few minutes, and we'll meet you there. Look forward to seeing you. And Jono, man, it's good to see you again. I miss you already, so let's do this again. We'll be with them next week.
See you then.
All right, brother.